Well, thank you and good morning, everybody. We're here on this mixed real-time in-person and virtual panel this morning, and the subject is sustainability in the hyper data world. And we've got an expert panel that I'd like to introduce to you who's going to walk us through some of the issues associated with that. So on the panel today we have on my left here Sunil Gupta, who's CEO and co-founder of Yotta. I'll come to you in a minute to introduce yourself as well. Online I hope we have Craig Pennington, Vice President of Data Center Engineering at Oracle, and also Dave Sterlace, Head of Technology Global Data Center Solutions at ABB. So welcome everybody. Maybe, Sunil, I could just ask you to introduce yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Hi everybody, my name is Sunil Gupta. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Yotta. Yotta is a pretty new data center operator and provider in India. We started 3 years back. Personally, I have been to the data center industry for almost 24 years now, so-called the data center man of India, having built around 20 facilities and building more. In Yotta, we are promoted by a real estate developer in India, which built townships. And they were my vendor in my previous assignment when I was an entity in India. And what we are doing in Yotta is to bring the PropCo capabilities of the real estate operator, which is my promoter, with the OpCo capabilities, which me and my team brings. So the idea is the growth which India is, seeing for the next so many years in the last 5 years, we are able to have a complete, capability right from land acquisition to approvals, permitting to MEP design, engineering, everything in-house, and so that we can build at a very, very rapid pace. This is about us. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunil. Maybe I could ask Craig, if you're online, if you could perhaps introduce yourself and your role at Oracle.
Hello, everyone. Yes, Craig Pennington. I am the VP for Data Center Engineering at Oracle. Relatively new to the company, but we can perhaps speak to why and where and as we go through the call. I'm responsible for the engineering, design and standards and practices for all of OCI's data centers. And OCI, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, is the cloud portion of Oracle's software delivery capability. So one of the larger hyperscalers, and the intent of that is to build off Oracle's highly secure platform to deliver all of Oracle's services in an easily digestible cloud-centric manner, rather than having to deploy infrastructure and equipment in your own facilities or at your own company's premises.
Thank you, Craig. And then finally, Dave, maybe I could come to you. Maybe you can introduce yourself and your role.
Sure. Thanks, Jonathan. Dave Sterlace. I'm with ABB. We're primarily an electrification and industrial automation company in data centers. We've been heavily involved for about 10 years now. And we're really looking at digitalizing your electrical powertrain, as well as automating some of the processes, primarily around sustainability, energy efficiency, things like that.
Okay, thanks very much, Dave. I think the subject area obviously is a hot topic at the moment, and I think many of the hyperscalers have moved. In fact, all of the hyperscalers have moved on to some really quite challenging questions around sustainability in the world that we now live in. Craig, could I come to you and just get a perspective from Oracle as to how you see sustainability and what that means to Oracle and the ecosystem that you're working in?
Certainly, yes. So, as you point out, it's a challenging area. What we have is a growing, burgeoning business. It's expanding dramatically. We currently have 40 regions globally. So a region would be, a data center delivered autonomous region for the delivery of the OCI services. We have 40 currently. We'll have 60 by the end of our financial year, which is the middle of this calendar year. And so delivering that level of growth whilst trying to do it with sustainability top of mind is incredibly challenging, because it is impossible to deliver data center services without consuming significant portions of energy. And so I think there are three main things that we think of as we're trying to deal with this, which is design efficiently, site carefully, and then when it gets to the end of the life, reuse and recycle extensively. So those are our major drivers. We have a stated goal of carbon neutral for all of our power consumption in all of our facilities, be that Oracle's headquarters and offices or the data centers, by 2025. We're aiming for net zero for all emissions by Oracle by 2050. And obviously, rather than just leaving it hang out there, we have a goal of 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. Not necessarily straightforward. There are obviously issues around being able to achieve that everywhere in the world geographically. Some countries are far more advanced in their policy and planning around sustainability than others. But I think this is where companies like ourselves, where Oracle can help lead that charge to deliver the services that everyone requires, but do it in a way which is not damaging to the planet.
Okay, thanks, Craig. And Dave, just coming to you, in terms of the things that Craig's talking about, do you think we've understood, do you think the industry understands what the scale and nature of the sustainability challenge is, and has the solutions in place, or is that something still work in progress at the moment?
Well, for me, and through the efforts of folks like Craig, in terms of changing the designs over time, we've become a lot more efficient. As he mentioned, we've valued more. We've kept the resiliency, but then able to get the utilization up with things. So I think that it's slowly evolving. But to be honest, what surprised me is how fast this went from a nice to have to an absolutely positively must have, especially for, I'm a 120-something-year-old, not me personally, but an electrical vendor, and we've been amazed at how fast things are changing, and we're putting tons of effort into it. And the other aspect of it is, of course, we can talk about efficiency, which as I mentioned, the design comes a big place, and of course we've made advancements in power electronics and things. But folks need to keep in mind, sometimes 95% of your greenhouse gases are from second and third party stuff. So you need to be partners with your vendors in order to make sure that's happening. And similarly, we're looking for carbon neutral by 2030. We have pilot plants already where we're doing net zero manufacturing and things. So the quicker we can all, we got to all understand we're pulling the same rope here. And that's I think really the point of what I'd like to bring to the party here.
And do you think, I guess Craig and Dave, do you think this is being mandated by the hyperscalers, or is this something that the industry as a whole has said, yes, we've got to do this? Maybe Craig.
A bit of both, I think, is the answer on that one. There's legislation which is pushing us in this direction. There's the sense that we need to do things much more efficiently anyway. The amount of resources being consumed by data centers is significant, and we need to do better to minimize the waste usage. So, for instance, power usage efficiency, PUE, is a pretty typical measure for how data centers are operating, how much power is being used to deliver compute power versus how much power is being consumed by the whole facility. And we've got to do everything we can to drive that down. Simultaneously, you can't just do that by then consuming great big gobs of water. So the entire design philosophy has got to be one which reduces the overall impact and reduces the reliance on the natural resources that we by default need to consume to deliver these services. Today's point on the supply chain side of things, he's absolutely right. I can do a lot on the design front to look at innovative technologies to drive down our excess consumption. So liquid cooling, better and cleaner sources of power overall, removing the reliance on diesel generators and looking at alternatives for backup. But beyond that, when you're looking at things like the Scope 3 emissions, or those that are implicit in the construction of the facility in the first place, we have to drive our suppliers to look very carefully at lower embodied carbon concrete, for instance, better smelting plants for the steel production, so that we don't end up with really inefficient and highly carbon emitting steel. And so there's the initial phases of what can I currently deal with, and And for us, power consumption is by far and away Oracle's biggest single contributor to greenhouse gas, or potential contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Although we have managed to get to like 100% carbon neutral in Europe, we have to extend that now to the rest of the world. But with our suppliers, we need to just drive them hard to be part of this entire process, and that's where Oracle and the other hyperscalers have a big back to wield. We're major players in the market as far as buying services are concerned, and we get to choose who we buy from. If they're not meeting our sustainability requirements, then we can elect to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and Dave, you're feeling that as well. You're feeling the pressure coming from the customer end of it.
Yeah, well, we view it as a competitive advantage. We were early adopters of this. You know, we have European DNA, so to your earlier question, there's been more movement there. I think the industry as a whole, what's missing is global standards. So if we as the industry can drive that and they're above the kind of bare minimums everywhere, then we'll all be better. And then we won't have to worry about it. We can, Oracle, for example, not putting words in Craig's mouth, but can use the same similar design in multiple regions, and then it makes his life easier. It makes me as a supplier, our life easier supplying to him. So I think that's kind of another thing that we need to look at as well.
Thanks, Dave. Sunil, turning to you, the dynamics in India are sort of add another dimension to the sustainability challenge. So how are you finding the sustainability challenge in India and what you're experiencing at the moment?
In India, we are facing a typical situation where, you know, we are talking about how to balance sustainability with the growth which the country is witnessing. So traditionally, you know, while the industry is there in India since maybe late 90s and early 2000, but we were all like building very small facilities. It was more driven by enterprise demand and not really the hyperscaler demand. So India, the whole country, till about 2014, we were just about 200 megawatt as a whole country across all providers. But 2013-14, the hyperscalers came. You know, Amazon came, followed by Google, followed by Azure, and then Oracle, and everybody came. And suddenly the industry has just catapulted to, you know, building more. And today the situation is in a main market like Mumbai, you know, despite the 200 megawatt becoming 400 megawatt just in the last 3 or 4 years, we are still extremely short of demand. There are almost every global player has come in India. Existing operators have started building up. We have started, you know, announced large plans, but still we feel that India, the country, for the next 7 to 10 years, will have to keep on building capacities to reach where India should be. You know, if you just try to see, you know, the data center megawatt per capita, you know, India possibly is 1/40th of what the US is, or 1/15th of what Europe is. So there's a whole scope for, you know, catching up. So if you ask me today, the narrative in India is more on facilitating and incentivizing operators to come and build. So naturally, when you're talking about more of growth and development, it becomes more of how do you get to build more campuses, how do you get 2 connections of power, how do you get more and more power, 200 megawatt and more. The narrative of sustainability and green in this discussion sometimes take a secondary approach.
Right.
So this is one part of the story. But what is happening, and I feel that will happen possibly in very, very near future, started coming in now, is that as hyperscalers are maturing and getting into bigger buildings, they have started asking for BTS sites for themselves, like full buildings. The narrative of asking for green power, asking for lesser PUE, you know, those things have started coming in. Just about 3-4 months back, I always thought that this is something which is good to talk in events. You know, but this is something which will catch up with us possibly a couple of years later. But today I have seen a hyperscaler asking me formally in contract that I need to compensate him for the amount of carbon I'm generating beyond a particular level and over a 5-year of contract period. Unless I bring the carbon level per kWh to a particular level, I need to compensate him. And if I don't do that, it possibly means 20% of my contract value being paid to the operator as a compensation. So I would say one is for a good corporate governance point of view, and also now with the, like as we were talking, like Dave was talking about, with the demands of the hyperscalers coming in, is sooner than later that we as an industry will start catching up and start getting to green power. Good part in India is that as a country, unlike what 5 years we were, today we are surplus in power as a country, and 40% of the whole of power of the country is actually green power, is based on the solar power which is being generated by whether it's a large corporate house putting up large plants or whether it's small landlords who have got ample amount of land and they are putting investment to solar plants. And regulation-wise, government is extremely supportive and they are rather trying to incentivize that. Yes, we are incentivizing you for building big data centers, but if you bring more green energy, we'll rather give you a little bit more subsidy than if you build a normal data center. So it is quite a good, I would say, mix of growth and sustainability narrative catching up gradually. So
you're seeing in India, obviously, this huge growth in demand, and that's putting pressure on, but you're seeing hyperscale customers still saying this growth needs to be on a sustainable basis, and the government's starting to regulate to support that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me just correct here. So 2 points. One is, yes, hyperscalers are not asking right now that we have to have 100% green energy or a particular portion of energy to be green right now, because they understand the ground reality at the moment. While there may be a lot of generation of power, but to get that green power to your data center, there's still some distribution challenges which we as a country are trying to handle. So what they are doing is contractually they are actually putting their rights that at some point of time they have the right to bring their own green energy in case they want to, or facilitating their green energy contracting through me as a service provider. So they're putting their rights in the contracts. And as I said, one of the providers just about 2 months back actually put it that over a period of 5 years, I need to ensure that green energy comes in, otherwise I have to compensate him by way of contractual value. Government is not regulating per se. So the good things, there are 2 things which has happened. One is, even when I go for a power from a regular utility provider, which is like a state government owned utility provider, government has mandated that 25% of the power of the utility provider in India has to be green. Right. So that is something which is coming to me by default. Even if I as a provider don't do anything, from the utility provider itself, I'm able to get at least 25% of the power which is green, which can be solar or wind or gas, whatever it is. On the top of that, the regulation says that if I am a consumer of more than 1 megawatt, which is very small from a data center point of view, I can have my own private arrangements with a solar power producer or a wind power producer who will just generate power at remote location in India, who will just upload into the grid, and then I can, basically pay to the government for transmitting that power and I can consume it at my facility. And government is saying that we will not regulate by way of disincentivizing you or penalizing you, but we will give you more incentives in case you are using more green. So it's like they are not trying to stop your growth, like what has unfortunately happened in Singapore, that because of too much of growth, they had to put a moratorium. So government is still trying to support you to build more and more, but they want to incentivize you more in case you put more green power.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll come back to the
Yep.
moratoriums in just a moment.
Yep.
I wonder, Dave and Craig, in terms of this pressure on sustainability and obviously the need for innovation, I think, Dave, you described the opportunity for competitive advantage. What do you see in terms of new sorts of power technology which are becoming that source of competitive advantage? Clearly in India, the green writing's on the wall. What are you seeing as the opportunities for the industry, and what's being developed from a power technology perspective?
So, in broad strokes, I think that data centers are almost by nature they're microgrids. So once we understand that, and I think moving forward we'll see a lot more interaction with the grid to that end. And as far as what technologies we're developing, again, a lot of things go to efficiencies like silicon carbide, higher efficiency power electronics. Where we have a commercially available solid state circuit breaker, for example, so very high efficiency, very high fault capacity and things like that. But more importantly, between the design, we're relying on utilization of the equipment more. And if we look at it as a microgrid, where a UPS then is really more a battery energy storage system that's grid interactive. And then finally, we've done some demo sites with alternate long-term backup. So the one we did recently had solar on site, had a microgrid, so full interaction with the grid, had fuel cells, and the fuel cells we used happened to be ammonia powered, so they were a little different feedstock than normal hydrogen powered, which brings some interesting things to it. And then also it had a battery energy storage system with it. So all that mixed together, all that brewed together. Look, diesel generators work. There's been a ton of advancements around alternate fuels like EVO.
Yep.
So I think that's coming as well. I think that we're going to see a lot of different changes. And I've been in here in the industry since I had brown hair, believe it or not, and once upon a time. And I keep saying it can't get any more interesting than this. And sure enough, every couple of years something happens that gets even more interesting. And I personally can't wait to see what happens next. But what I see is we're gonna have a lot more interplay with the grid. There's going to be a lot more autonomy. There's going to be a lot more dependence on control schemes. You know, right now, to be honest, on the electrical side, we're just monitoring, measuring. We're starting to get into control. We need to get into automation of that stuff. And some of the hyperscalers, I'm sure Craig's got some great stories around what he's doing with control, like on HVAC side. But some of the stuff I've seen is just incredible.
So we'll maybe come to Craig then. So in terms of the things that you're seeing being innovated in the market from a sustainability and power technology perspective, what do you like? What's coming your way that you think, yeah, we should be having this, we should be adopting this in Oracle at the moment?
I think Dave's nailed pretty much on the electrical front the things that we have to consider. I think we have to consider data centers as being effectively microgrids, and they have to interact much more effectively with local grid to help with their peaks and troughs and be part of the overall delivery in that local community. Because the construction, the design and construction and the cost of delivering new power stations is immense. Data centers at that smaller scale can be relatively clean. And so if you can knock off your older peak utility power stations from having to come onto the grid to deliver power and do it in a much more unclean manner, then we're working well with the local populace and economy. I think that in order to do that effectively, there will be an increase in local battery storage on these sites. I have done quite a lot of work with fuel cells, and I see a future where fuel cells, which are currently using natural gas to deliver power, will move to a hydrogen economy when hydrogen becomes more widely available. And I'm certainly seeing progress on that in Europe. The rest of the world yet to come. Diesel generators. Either we get to the point where we have two utility sources which you can be reliant on, and maybe that's fuel cells and the utility grid. But the other side, as Dave said, could be hydrogenated base oil, HVO, as an alternative fuel source, which then removes the carbon from the use of the diesel generators. On the cooling side, I am a massive advocate for the adoption of liquid cooling and driving up densities so that you can reduce footprint and get the same compute in a smaller footprint. But to do that, you've got to move away from the use of air, because it's a very inefficient medium for heat rejection. And there's a natural confluence at the moment where the chips are going to demand this in the very near future. And I think that the industry is recognizing there's a lot that can be done here because it helps drive down PUEs to very, very low numbers and minimize the waste that's required for cooling. There was unfortunately, a few years ago, I was on a panel, and one of the panelists said, liquid cooling is the cooling of the future and always will be. And I feel these years later that possibly the case, but I think the thing that has radically changed that perception is the fact that the chip manufacturers have now got to the limits of Moore's law, and if they don't drive up the power consumption in the chips, they're not giving us any more transistors. On the control side, as Dave alluded to, there's work to be done there. because I think naturally data center operators are very conservative because it's all about reliability. Everything else is secondary. Reliability is the most important thing. And so getting your head around having an AI engine control the building to deliver optimized cooling is something that it's going to take operators a lot of experimentation to get comfortable with, although it's starting to take effect. And certainly self-diagnostics inside things like UPSs in order to do just condition-derived maintenance and reduce the interaction is already there. Beyond that, I think we've got options for newer technology options such as software-defined power, where you can start to have relatively localized battery storage, augmenting the use of the power system to again fill in the peaks and troughs, just like you would do with a grid-enabled system. But here it's so that you can drive up the utilization, and that therefore means that we as operators are not deploying significant amounts of overcapacity, which is obviously wasteful in its manufacture and its operation. And so we can drive closer to the total capacity of the UPSs deployed and the generators and the utility power deployed, but doing it in a safe and regulated manner, which doesn't put customers at risk. So it's a challenging, but it's a really exciting position at the moment. I think there's a lot of new technologies coming to the fore, which will over time have to be adopted, because the requirement to reduce our emissions and be more efficient and less wasteful in the use of all the resources that we do consume is paramount.
Thank you, Craig. Perhaps in our last 3 minutes, I see, clearly, regulators haven't always agreed that the industry is innovating fast enough or enough. And we've seen in Singapore, we've seen in Holland as well, moratoriums put in place. Do you think that, Sunil, do you think that's going to be more of a regulatory tool that's we're going to see in this world of sustainable hyperdata?
I don't think so. I think it'll be context-specific, country-specific. Singapore being a very small country with seeing like tremendous amount of growth of data center that started impacting, like what I understand is almost 10% of the energy of Singapore was being consumed by data centers, and it actually got necessitated that unless you put a moratorium and actually ask the operators to take the significant drastic measures to reduce their carbon output, I think it became necessary for them. As I said, that for a very large country like India, which is also underserved, for a significant amount of time, the narrative of growth will be paramount compared to, I would say, sustainability, which will be there, but will be always a secondary objective. We have an advantage of, let's say, while we have a disadvantage of being late, but that is also our advantage that we are late. So we can take all the right steps, which possibly Singapore is taking or the US or Europe is taking in terms of right from starting, have the right regulations, right incentivizations and penalizations for operators to have green energy. As I said, so many times hyperscalers are driving it, they are demanding it in contracts. So many times the government, which has become very, very active that this is a tool for the so-called digital India, they are incentivizing all of us that we are willing to give you, more incentives in case you bring power. There are challenges at the nominal state utility level that they don't want to take green energy as a competitive, it's like kills their business, so they still want to have some hindrances, which I think government is trying to clean this. Good part is that in India at least, we are not trying to have a balance between growth and sustainability. I mean, green power is not only green, but also it happens to be cheaper in India to use green power compared to a typical thermal power from a utility. Like from a utility, if I talk about from an Indian rupees point of view, if I'm paying, let's say, 8 rupees per unit in India, a green power net to my facility will cost me, let's say, 6 rupees, which is still so it's like best of both the worlds. So operators don't have to complain if they're asked to, either by regulation or by hyperscalers, to go for green energy.
Thank you. Yeah. Craig, what, are you seeing this similarly as a potential tool that's being used? Maybe we've got 30 seconds left, so I think
moratoriums are a bit of a cudgel. It's better that government interacts with the data center community to find better ways to do it rather than a hard block. I I think if there is that engagement, the correct, not necessarily subsidies, but a level playing field for the use of HVO, so against the likes of the haulage industry, makes a lot of sense. I mean, why should it cost me more to utilize the same product for my generation, my power generation, when it's carbon neutral? Because there's a massive subsidy for transportation. So I'm not necessarily advocating for lobbying, but I am advocating for closer interaction with government so that they make the right decisions, which isn't just stop building, because that doesn't aid anyone. The world demands more of these services. It's certainly the most efficient way to deliver them rather than small data centers on premises. So we have to do better to get the government to work with us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great, Craig. And that's a great summary of I think where we are. I think what we're saying here is the industry has the innovation to drive and support sustainability in the hyper environment. We've got the backstop of government regulation, but we want to work together, which for me sounds like a very good conclusion to this panel. What I'd like to say, and thank you, Sunil, sitting here with me. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Craig, for your contributions, and audience. Thank you for our panelists for joining together on this panel this morning. So thank you, everybody.